The phone buzzed urgently as Ethan Crawford clicked through the final slide of his investor presentation. His assistant handed him the device with a furrowed brow. The caller ID made his stomach knot. Lila's school. 2 minutes later, he was already out the boardroom door, sprinting toward the lobby, car keys clutched in his hand. At the elementary school, Lila curled into herself on the nurse's cot, her small hands clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. Her breaths came shallow, punctuated with hiccuped sobs. A counselor knelt beside her, speaking gently. Some classmates had asked why she never talked about her mother, and the questions had triggered a panic. Ethan crouched next to his daughter, brushing a golden lock from her tear-streaked face. "I'm here," he whispered. "Daddy's here." Back at the Crawford home, the marble floors gleamed coldly under bright lights, furniture pristine and uninviting. Ethan lingered outside Lila's bedroom, watching her sit silently on the bed. The house felt more like an art gallery than a place for a child to feel safe. "She needs more than therapy," Ethan murmured. "She needs to feel safe," Mrs. Thompson said quietly, pausing beside him. "Maybe music," he suggested, a thought forming. "Something she doesn't have to explain." Mrs. Thompson nodded, scrolling through her contacts. "I know someone. I'll arrange it for tomorrow." The next day, a piano lesson was set with Grace Harper, known locally for working with anxious children. But at 4:30 p.m., an email arrived. Her mother had fallen ill, and she couldn't make it. Mrs. Thompson, distracted by Lila's afternoon struggles, didn't see the message. By the time they returned home, she was absorbed in guiding Lila inside, feeding her, settling her quietly. At exactly 5, the doorbell rang. Grace Harper, a single mother with chestnut hair and a soft smile, stood on the porch, coat dusted with the cold evening. In one hand, she carried a black satchel. In the other, a brown paper bag. "Uber Eats for Crawford?" she asked hesitantly. Mrs. Thompson blinked at her, then laughed softly. "You must be Grace. Thank you for coming on such short notice." Before Grace could correct the misunderstanding, Mrs. Thompson had turned into the kitchen. She stepped inside, unsure, boots squeaking across polished floors. The paper bag crinkled in her hands. She paused at the piano room door. A little girl curled on the bench, clutching her rabbit. A soft sob escaped Lila. Grace's chest tightened. She hadn't touched a piano since college, but the sight of the girl, so small and fragile, called to her. Carefully, she set down her bag, sat beside her, and let her fingers hover over the keys. Slowly, she played, one note at a time, imperfect but genuine. Lila's shoulders eased. A tiny smile emerged. From the stairwell, Ethan watched silently, coffee forgotten in his hand. He didn't step forward. He just listened. For the first time in months, hope seeped quietly into the house. Maybe, he thought, healing didn't start with plans or appointments. It began with the right person showing up at exactly the right moment. The next day, Grace returned, more prepared. She carried a small container of overbaked oatmeal cookies, her last ingredients. Mrs. Thompson welcomed her with a nod. Lila had been at the piano all afternoon, waiting. The girl's eyes brightened as Grace stepped into the room. Without a lesson plan, without warm-ups, they played together, fingers brushing, harmonizing in quiet companionship. "I had a dream last night," Lila said softly. "Mommy was calling me, but she was in the fog." Then she disappeared. Grace stopped, heart tight. "What if we made a song for that dream?" she asked gently. "A version where she stays safe." Lila pressed middle C. Together, they pieced together the melody, wobbly but honest. Grace scribbled the notes on the back of a shopping receipt. When they finished, Lila whispered, "It's called Safe Dream," then drew a picture of herself holding a tall figure's hand, purple markers swirling. She held it up proudly. "Miss Grace keeps me safe in the fog." Tears pricked Grace's eyes. Ethan, standing in the hallway, quietly acknowledged the small miracle before him. The melody, the laughter, the trust, it filled the house with warmth it had been missing for far too long. Grace stepped out into the crisp evening, her heart pounding. She had come to deliver food. Somehow, she had brought a child back to life, even if only a little, with nothing but music and presence. He stared at the drawing, frozen in the doorway. Lila's smile was wide, unguarded, the kind of light he hadn't seen since Caroline's passing. It should have filled him with peace. Instead, it pressed on his chest with something heavier, a mix of awe and unease. Awe. because Grace had reached a part of Lila's heart that therapy, routines, and even his unwavering presence hadn't touched. Unease, because for the first time in years, Ethan realized his daughter's healing might not come from him alone. He had poured everything into being mother and father, protector and comfort. And now, a woman who had stumbled into their lives by accident had found a place in Lila's most fragile world. Ethan wanted to trust it. He wanted to believe it was right. But the thought of Grace leaving, vanishing like Caroline had, made his chest tighten. He stepped back, closed his eyes, then opened them again. Lila laughed softly inside the piano room, following Grace's gentle hands over the keys as the final notes of Safe Dream lingered in the air, soft, tentative, unfinished, but beautiful in their imperfection. The next afternoon, rain drummed lightly on the windshield as Ethan pulled into the school pickup lane. The sky was low and gray, the world blurred into soft shapes. There, under the awning, stood Lila in her blue raincoat. Beside her, Grace was soaked from knees to coat hem, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Ethan leaned across the car and opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said quietly. Grace hesitated, wet gloves clutched in her hands. I'm drenched." "Leather seats. They'll survive," he said with a small smile. She climbed in, brushing water from her sleeves. Lila settled in the back seat, already absorbed in her sketchpad. The drive was nearly silent. Not awkward, not tense, just understanding. Ethan turned down the radio, listened to the rain pattering on the roof. "Thank you for staying with her," he said finally. "I didn't mind. She asked me to," Grace replied softly. Ethan nodded, hands tightening briefly on the wheel. After a pause, he spoke again. "My wife's name was Caroline. She was a nurse, stubborn, brave. She got pregnant with our second, a boy. There were complications, but she kept working, said people needed her. She smiled through it all, right until the end." He exhaled slowly, turning onto a side street. "I missed it, the signs. How she stopped looking at me the way she used to. I thought I was helping, holding everything together. Then she gave birth at 30 weeks. Our son didn't make it. She passed 3 days later. Blood clot. But the grief, the weight, it came first." "I'm sorry," Grace whispered. Ethan shook his head lightly. "I don't talk about her much, but with you, it feels easier." "I know what it's like to carry too much," she said. "My mom had a stroke when I was 20. I left college, music school, dropped everything to care for her. And Noah, my son, he's 5, bright, intense. Some days I barely manage." Ethan studied her face, not with pity, but quiet admiration. He returned his gaze to the road. The rain began to taper as they pulled into the driveway, the house glowing softly through mist. "He left the engine running," Grace said, half to herself. "She would have liked you," Ethan said suddenly. Grace tilted her head. "Who?" "Caroline. You don't really know me," she admitted softly. "Maybe not," he said, eyes on the house, "but Lila does. And I trust her instincts more than I trust most adults." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't suffocate but held space for thought. Grace remembered the photo she had glimpsed earlier that week, Caroline smiling, holding baby Lila. The kindness in her eyes lingered. If I were her, would Lila accept me? Grace wondered silently. Ethan shut off the engine. "Music doesn't heal everything," he said quietly. "Not fully, not the way people think. But it's a thread, a way back, a sound that reminds us we're still together." Raindrops slid like slow-moving notes down the windshield. From the back seat, Lila's voice whispered, "Daddy, can we play the new song again later?" Ethan glanced at Grace. "Yes, sweetheart. We will." The next morning, soft snow fell, dusting the streets and sidewalks in white. Ethan watched from his office window as Grace pedaled away, her silhouette wobbling against the icy wind, shoulders hunched with effort. Something about the image stayed with him. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and Lila asleep, he asked Mrs. Thompson casually, "She left on her bike?" "She always does," the housekeeper said softly. "Doesn't drive. Lives in the old housing complex off 8th and Elmore." Ethan said nothing more, but that night, alone, he typed. He arranged a quiet donation, 3 months' rent relief for a single mother named Grace Harper. No fanfare, no signature. A simple note printed, "You gave my daughter something no school or doctor ever could. You made her feel safe. That's worth everything." 3 days later, Grace arrived late. cheeks flushed from effort, hair damp from melting snow. Mrs. Thompson greeted her warmly, but before she reached the piano room, Ethan stepped into the hallway. "May we talk for a moment?" he asked, calm but firm. Grace followed into the sitting room, heart hammering. "I got a message from the music center today," he began. "I saw the roster of instructors. Your name isn't on it." Grace swallowed. "I wasn't supposed to be there that day," she admitted softly. "I was delivering food. Mrs. Thompson thought I was the new teacher. I tried to explain, but then I heard Lila crying. I stayed. I never meant to deceive you. I needed the money, yes, but never to lie. I should have spoken sooner. I'm sorry." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He simply held her gaze, steady, waiting. "Please, don't punish Lila for this," she whispered. "I'll go. I can leave. Just don't take her away." The silence pressed in, heavy and watchful. Grace turned toward the door, ready to retreat. But then Lila's voice rang out, fierce and trembling, from the doorway. "No," Lila shouted, tears streaking her cheeks. "She didn't lie to me." "She didn't lie? Don't make her go. If you do, I'll never speak again." Lila's voice cracked, small and fierce. Grace froze. Ethan stepped around the corner just as Lila darted forward, wrapping herself tightly around Grace's waist. "Please," Lila sobbed, "don't leave me." Grace knelt, pulling Lila close, rocking gently. Her voice was soft, a whisper that carried warmth. "I promise, I'll always be here for you," she said, one hand over Lila's. "Right here." Lila broke free and ran to the piano. Hands trembling, she climbed onto the bench and pressed the keys. The notes were simple, hesitant, imperfect, but they were hers. She whispered the name aloud. "Safe Dream." The melody floated through the house, fragile and brimming with emotion. Ethan lingered in the doorway, silent. Lila's small frame shook with sobs, but she played on. In that instant, something inside him shifted. He had obsessed over rules, perfection, the right choices, but he had overlooked what Lila needed most: safety, trust, and belonging. Watching her, hearing the tremulous notes mix with the rainfall outside, he felt loss again, raw and aching. But beneath it, there was something new, a desire to protect, to honor the fragile courage in front of him. For the first time in years, tears threatened. As the final note lingered, Ethan stepped forward. Lila glanced up, torn between fear and hope. He said nothing, letting the silence carry the weight of understanding. Rightness on paper didn't matter anymore. Heart mattered. Later, in the quiet hum of the office, Ethan sat at the head of the table. Executives shuffled papers, reports and charts flickering across the screen. Words like optimization and projections filled the air, but he wasn't listening. His eyes rested on the company logo in the corner of the slide. Healing minds, honest hearts. Words that had once been a promise now felt like a quiet accusation. Without a word, he stood. "Ethan," someone called. He ignored it, moving toward the door. Driving through gray, damp streets. He didn't know where he was heading until the school came into view. Inside, a teacher greeted him warmly. "Mr. Crawford, you just missed pickup." "I'm not here for Lila," he said gently. "I just needed to see something." The teacher led him to a wall of student projects. "She's been working on this all week," she said, pointing to a sheet of music titled by Lila herself. The melody was simple, clumsy, uneven, but below it, a drawing stole his breath. A man and a woman seated on a bench, a little girl holding both their hands. It was him, Grace, and Lila. "She says it's about finding your way back when you're lost," the teacher said quietly. Her safest song. Ethan lingered before leaving, the drawing pressed into his mind. On the way home, he passed the community health center his company supported. Inside, a small child rocked gently, sketching under the watchful eye of a mother. Not trained, not credentialed, but fully present. That presence, that quiet listening, was everything. He thought of Grace, her patience, her ability to turn fear into song, sorrow into comfort. Sometimes the wrong person in the right moment was exactly what a heart needed. The next day, Ethan drove to her modest neighborhood. The sun cast golden light on peeling paint and struggling flower beds. Grace opened the door, surprised to see him. Her hands were dusty, sweater worn, hair tied back loosely. He stepped inside, silent, letting the faint music from the piano reach him first. "I don't know how to play," he admitted, resting hands on the keys. "But Lila taught me this." The first song I wanted to play for someone. He pressed the opening notes of Safe Dream. They were hesitant, uneven, but filled with grief, forgiveness, and a spark of something new, love. Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She joined him, not to guide, just to listen. When the final note faded, silence held them. You didn't have to come, Grace whispered. I had to, he said. Sometimes, hearts just know where they belong, even if it takes wrong turns to get there. She laughed softly, tears falling freely. Words weren't needed. Days later, at the local community center, the fundraiser for Healing Minds filled the room with chatter. On stage, Lila sat at the piano, hands poised. Next to her, Noah held a tambourine, bright-eyed but nervous. They began to play Safe Dream, slightly off rhythm, but brimming with heart. The audience listened, unaware of the months of healing woven into each note. Backstage, Ethan and Grace stood together. She wore a simple blue dress, hair tucked neatly behind her ears. He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining naturally. Neither said, I love you, not yet. But their eyes met, and the silence was enough. A melody of understanding, trust, and a quiet promise. In that moment, Ethan knew some songs, like some people, were meant to find us in the spaces we never thought could heal. And sometimes, the wrong melody, or the unexpected stranger, was exactly what made everything right.